They taught us in the servants' quarters to measure power by silence. How long a room could hold it. How neatly a man could wear it like a cloak. In the Hall of Stars, the silence was an heirloom, polished and passed down through centuries. Tonight it felt brittle, a thin glass ready to splinter. I stood on the black marble that had been poured and cooled before my great-grandmother's great-grandmother was born, and felt every eye in the semicircle of the court tilt toward me. Vampires leaned like statues, their collars and cuffs flashed under the floating lights. The chandeliers hummed with old spells. The painted constellations looked down like indifferent gods. I remember the first time I heard those eyes on me, months ago when I'd been someone else's whispered rumour, a secret tucked into late-night bowlings and then discarded. The memory tastes like iron. I had been small then, not in body but in permission. I moved through the palace as a shadow moves through a room held at dawn. I was the whisper on the king's sleeve, the scent of hot water on his linens. He had taken me in a night of strange generosity, or terrible boredom depending on who told the tale, and marked me with a kiss that was more teeth than tenderness. The bite made an atlas of me, every tremor of my pulse, each small frightened hope written into a map he could read by touch. That bite gave me something and took something. A mark, yes, the ribbon of a curse that would blood me into a court's tale. But also an eraser. After the kiss, doors closed. Halls I used to wander became forbidden. He moved me to a wing that kept its own moonlight and its own rules. I became a thing to keep, not to show. He said it was to keep me safe. The court called it pragmatism. I called it a cage. Tonight the cage had a doorway and I walked through it. Reza Vane walked 2 paces behind me like a shadow with teeth. He wore exile in the way others wore medals. Quietly, rigidly, and with a danger that made the servants' hands go cold. He'd been the Shadow Guard's commander until the king's politics wrapped around him and snapped the blade of his loyalty. He had refused to obey certain orders. He'd refused orphans who asked for mercy. He'd refused once to be the mechanism for another's quiet ruin. For that, he'd been stripped of rank, and the court had whittled his name into rumour. For that, he now stood with me, and not before the throne. When the obsidian doors opened and we entered the hall, the sound the room made was not a greeting. It was the slow catching of breath before a thunderclap. 200 faces turned, venerable dukes, ladies whose smiles were legal documents, soldiers with teeth like punctuation. They had never seen me walk there before. I was certain some of them had expected me to burn on the spot, to turn to ash the moment my foot crossed holy marble. I crossed the aisle and paused at the dais. The Blood King sat above us like something the night had spat out into court regalia. Calith Draven, a name that tasted like gravity. He was a man who wore kingship the way one might wear armour. Heavy, practiced, seamless. He watched me with an expression that might have been curiosity but was more likely calculation. His eyes, deep red as a garnet soaked through with moonlight, tracked the motion of my hands, the hitch of my breath. He had baptized me with teeth, then buried me under proprieties, and now, perhaps, he imagined the bizarre comedy of discovering that his keeping had created a ghost that could remember. "You should not be here," he said. His voice rolled across the hall like velvet dragged across a blade. He did not rise from the throne, but his whole presence slid the way pressure will slide across water. "I am here," I answered. The words left my mouth as if they had been waiting there for months, densely packed. A small, ridiculous thing, a memory of a child's trick of speaking up when a grown voice thought it had the right to speak last, made my tongue steady. His lips pressed together. "You walk in forbidden places." "I walk where you marked me," I said. The scar at my throat prickled. It had been lightened by the paleness of my skin, made small by time and salves, but it was there like a punctuation. I touched it, almost by habit, and felt the echo beneath the skin, the night's cold, the rumour of power that had made a map of my blood. He lifted a single finger, deliberate as a judge. You should not show that. You should not give that, I said. There's a middle in voices like that. A place where a person who has everything can play at being offended and not be vulnerable. It's a trick, and I saw it in him. He was bracing to brand my words as insolent because insolence is easy to punish. Reza's boots made no sound as he stepped, so the air between us changed texture. He did not take my hand. He did not need to. He placed himself where the king's path would fall should the king choose to cross the line that night. You stand at her back. Calith's voice narrowed into something sharper. He glared at Reza as if the exiled man's very existence was an accusation. I stand where she chooses, Reza answered. The syllables were slow and controlled, like a steel blade being unsheathed in measured time. It is funny how courage works. It is never entirely the loud, impossible thing you think it will be. Here it was a small movement, Reza stepping into the space between two older worlds. That step made a roar in the court that had no words. You defy my law, the king said. He had said worse. His voice could be a weapon. His decree could ripple into exile or fire or cage. But he did not command death that night. He had learned perhaps that commands lose their teeth when the subject of the command is a thing he had once claimed and then thrown away. No, Reza said. I defend. I inhaled then, a human breath loud in a room that never learned to be human again. I accept your bite, I said, and the words felt like flint striking steel. I wanted them to carry through the hall and lodge in the ribs of every noble who'd ever whispered my name like a secret. And your rejection. There was a moment like a dropped stone. It made a perfect hollow sound in the air. Someone gasped. Someone's gaunt hand moved to a throat like a prayer. The candles shivered. Calith's countenance changed in increments. A man of his age could not quicken his motion and still keep regal. But something internal and urgent, older than law, spiked at the edges of his face. He bristled like an animal, hearing a recall. It did not want to answer. You cannot speak like that in my hall. He rose then, casually, and the whole world shifted because it had always been his to warp. The throne's base groaned. Marble dust speckled the air. You mock me. I do not mock you. The truth took a different shape than I expected, sharp, raw, and simple. I name what you did. I name that you claimed me and then hid me. You kept me as a secret. You kept me to keep your crown whole. Calith's fingers flexed. For a heartbeat, he looked unguarded. I had seen it before only once. On a night the winter had been bitter, and he'd come to me with trembling hands and stories he never told his dukes. That glimpse had lasted for a private and foolish bliss. Tonight there was no tenderness in it, only a fracture. You do not understand the things that would have been done to you, he said. He sounded like a man reciting an old fear. I kept you to keep you safe. You kept me safe by erasing me. The sentence landed like a verdict. You kept me as a thing that would not be found because that would have been easier for you. You turned a life into a cushion for your vanity. The court hummed with the small panics of the powerful. A whisper became a tide. She is insolent. She speaks ill of the king. She will be punished. Reza stepped forward, a motion that was no longer merely practical. She is her own thing, he said. His voice was a blade now, honed to declare borders. You do not get to decide her fate without telling her. Calith's mouth tightened. You could see the gears inside his mind, ancient levers that swung history. You would bring treason to my hall, he said. And Reza said what exile makes men say, without flinching. Then call me a traitor. There are moments when the world holds its breath because it does not want to decide which way to fall. This was one of them. The court wavered like a forest in a wind. The king's hands went from calm to a clamp, from a caress to a threat. You think you can reject me, he said, and his voice dropped until it was almost a whisper that nevertheless carried like a bell through a church. While hiding behind him, he meant it to sting, to drag the last of my dignity into the dirt. He meant to make me small. What he did not account for was that the hiding had already happened. I had already been invisible for months. I had been hollowed out by that quiet, and from the hollowness, something lethal and clear had grown. I had not come hiding. I had come to unhide myself. Reza's hand found my waist, not possessive but anchored. His single finger pressed along my spine with an insistence that steadied more than armor. "She is standing with me," he said. "If you touch her, if you touch what she is, you will have me." There are beasts in the world whose mercy is worse than their brutality. Reza's loyalty promised both. Calith's very breath changed. For a second the two men measured each other. One had an empire that ran on terror and ceremony. The other wore exile like a blade that did not dull. They were symmetrical and dangerous. They were two kinds of kings, one a throne, one a covenant. Calith's face went hard. "So be it," he said. The word was all a king needs to send men to the pyre. Reza's fangs descended like a vow. It was the nearest thing to a cannon's report I had ever heard indoors. The court's breath left their lungs in a single tide. The chandeliers dimmed as if the light itself feared what would come. "You would touch her?" Calith asked. And I saw the old hunger. Possession. The private arithmetic of a king who measures his worth by what lies near him. Reza's voice was a low, precise thing. "Try me." Calith smiled then, a slow, furious slash of a grin. And it was the kind of thing that rearranges the furniture of a room for anyone with eyes to see. He stepped off the dais and the marble under his boots cracked with the sound of old treaties breaking. The first magic struck like a storm. Stone split. Candles guttered. Scent of ozone and old roses rolled through the hall. In the space between breath and action, between the decision to own and the decision to defend, I felt something break inside me that was not fear. It was the last tether of being someone's thing. I stepped forward beneath all of that roaring power, and my voice was steady as the last rope on a collapse. "If you will burn me for this, burn the world." And then we moved. Kings, an exiled commander, and a woman who had had enough of being quiet. The hall erupted like thunder, and the war that had been papered over for years began with the sound of two men who loved me for different reasons, striking at the axis of my life. They were both right, in their way. One loved me as a piece that made his world whole, the other as a cause to die for. Neither knew how to stand with me as a person. That, I realized as the first blow fell and the chandeliers swayed, would be my work to teach them. The Hall of Stars remembered violence the way some people remembered a lost love, as a physical ache that could be summoned by a scent or a syllable. Weeks later, the quartz still held the ghost of impact, and the chandeliers trembled when thunder passed overhead. People moved through the corridors carefully, as if the walls themselves might betray them. The first night, after the clash, I did not sleep. The bed Anna had arranged for me, pale sheets, heavy curtains, a lamp that hummed like an insect trapped in amber, felt like a stage. Every shadow watched. Dawn found me still awake, sitting upright when Reza entered, rain darkening his hair, the smell of wet leather and iron clinging to him. "You did not have to go into the hall alone," he said. "You told me not to hide," I answered. It sounded brittle even to me. "I said stand with me," he corrected. "Not offer yourself to their mouths." His hands adjusted the blanket at my shoulders, warm, careful, intimate without desire. The touch of someone tending damage. "I test, therefore I learn," I said. I wanted them to know I wouldn't be skinned quietly. He made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You wanted a revolution." "Revolutions don't whisper." Outside, rain blurred the city into watercolours. The palace beyond the terrace looked stitched together from night and light. Below, courtiers were already arranging defence and rumour. Velthern's politics, I learned, ran on hushed gears, favours traded beneath crystal goblets, alliances sealed by the press of a knee. A world that made kings of men who learned to pretend their feelings were ledger items. When I went to council the next day, because of course I did, I entered a smaller, more deliberate world. Beeswax and old paper. Lord Orrin arrived first, folded in the wrong places, silver at his temples like frost. He greeted me with a small smile and a bowl of dates from the south. "You brought a storm," he said. "I brought myself," I replied. They called mortal storms because storms were inconvenient, but occasionally useful. Vorlag sat angled away, hawk-faced and thin-lipped, his smile worn like a verdict. When Orrin opened the session, its purpose was stability and precedent. Translation: determine whether the king's behaviour was catastrophe or inconvenience. The council conserved the system. Kingship here was a living archive, always threatening to tear. Vorlag spoke first. Bloodlines, ancient law, the dangers of entanglement. He recited history as prophecy. "Remember King Aldara," he said, and the room tightened. Aldara meant madness, destruction, tragedy repurposed as warning. To accept a mortal into proximity of power is to invite rot. Nods followed, fingers weighed signets, ritual in motion. Calith rose next, armed as always. He spoke of law, not affection, of trials, safeguards, adaptation. "Our survival depends on learning," he said, "not obedience to ghosts." Some shifted because it made sense. Trade mattered now. Others because power calculations demanded flexibility. Orrin supported the king. Isolde leaned toward neutrality. Vorlag did not bend. I realized then the arguments were not about me. I was leverage. Becoming visible had made me an axis. To be seen was to be used, and to be used was a kind of immortality. That night, Vorlag sent a deputy to my lodgings. He brought a southern gown and a poison faint as dust. He smiled as if he expected gratitude. "For your appearance," he said. I didn't touch it. "You think threats unmake me?" I asked. "We seek order," he said smoothly. "You seek control," Reza said from the doorway. Vorlag's smile thinned. "Commander, still bound to old Mores." "My allegiance is to what is right," Reza replied, "not what is customary." When Vorlag left, I reached for Reza's hand without thinking. His fingers closed around mine, not possession, not romance, but pact. A holdfast. Outside, pamphlets began to circulate, anonymous sermons, the mortal as corrupter, the mortal as foreign agent. People read them the way they read weather, to plan. I chose movement over hiding. Reza and I walked the outer markets in daylight, under false simplicity. He let me bargain for bread and lamps. Merchants argued prices instead of bowing. Children ran with more honest economy than dukes. Each walk inoculated me against the palace's carved teeth. The palace adapted. Calith gave me an antechamber. Servants used a title instead of whispers. A guard at my door made a statement. I was not alone, which made me a target. The attack came late. I had been dozing with a law book in my lap when the guard stilled at a false passphrase. I heard the imitation, tasted copper. The door whispered open. The attacker was small, trained, efficient. Her blade aimed not for my heart but my throat, the mark made political. The world contracted, steel flashed. Moonlight caught it like silver thread. Reza moved like thunder. 3 more shapes dropped from shadow. This was professional, clean. "Go," he barked. I ran. The hall beyond spilled faces and sound. When I turned back, Reza stood alone, blade slick, breathing hard. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. "Not," I said, and then lied. By morning the palace carried the pall of violence and the churn of rumour. Someone had staged a message. Vorlag's name hovered, but motive was plentiful. What the attempt did was clarify. Visibility was dangerous, but silence was worse. I wanted to be a presence that made violence expensive. That night, as I bandaged a shallow cut, Reza watched with a soldier's focus. "You won't be alone again," he said. "No," I agreed. He unrolled a map and circled a quarter. "We train. You learn blind spots." "You mean fight. I mean deterrence." We began. Movement, reading rooms, listening for lies that smelled like burnt sugar, learning how to make attention costly. The palace adjusted. Some smiles changed, others sharpened. The machine wound tighter. Vorlag plotted. He always would. But when dawn came and I stood breathing, stubborn and mortal, there was a grim sweetness to it. I had become an argument no one could end quietly. And the palace would remember the shape of that. The palace kept trying to turn me into a story. First, I was the secret, something whispered behind sleeves, handled carefully, like a blade wrapped in silk. Then I was the scandal, a disruption with a name and a body, a rumor that learned how to walk. After that, I became a symbol of indulgence, of weakness, of the crown's appetites running ahead of its judgment. If I had been simpler, I might have let them finish the work. I might have allowed myself to become the ghost they could mourn briefly and then forget, a cautionary tale folded neatly into court memory. But I had learned, slowly, painfully, that once someone claims the shape of your life, survival begins with refusing their map. After the attempt on my throat, the palace stopped feeling like stone and started feeling alive. Not alive in a grand mythic way, but like a body that had noticed an infection. It tightened. It adjusted. It worked quietly to excise what did not belong. Guard rotations changed, not openly, not dramatically, but with new precision. Servants who once smiled too freely now measured their expressions. Small kindnesses, extra bread, warmer water, a pause in a doorway, did not disappear, but they became hidden, tucked carefully into gestures that could pass for accidents. Gossip shifted like wind. Some currents bruised, others carried protection. I learned to tell them apart by scent. Men who lied smelled sweeter, like wine left too long in the sun. Vorlag never stopped smiling. That was the most dangerous thing about him. When Vorlag smiled, it was because something had balanced in his head. A ledger closed, a profit confirmed. He began appearing at tables where I had once been an absence rather than a presence. He brought allies. He asked questions that were shaped like courtesy but cut like blades. His deputies left notes. Never explicit threats, never accusations, just implications heavy enough to tilt rooms. Foreign influence, destabilized rituals, a mortal variable in systems that had lasted centuries. He wasn't spreading fear. He was sculpting it, shaping panic from clay he had softened himself. And somewhere in the middle of that pressure, I realized my task was not to survive quietly. It was to turn myself from a symbol into a strategy. Reza understood this instinctively, the way generals understand terrain before maps are drawn. He saw shape, how people leaned toward power, where they overextended, where they left themselves exposed. He taught me how to enter rooms without shrinking, not with the theatrical posture of a queen, that would have been laughable in halls that devoured pretenders, but with the stance of a negotiator, present, listening, laughing where laughter disarmed, holding silence where silence unsettled. We started small. Manners, it turns out, are weapons when they are unexpected. I listened to dukes complain about tariffs and ports and the slow rot of old alliances. I redirected conversations toward practicalities, grain flow, caravan security, merchant confidence. I let them see a mortal who could generate profit instead of chaos. Trade became my armor. Each coin I helped place in the right hand rang softly, like a blade no one could quite remove. Still, at night, I felt the bite on my throat, like a map others could read better than I could. Reza sat with me during those hours, not speaking mostly, his presence a steady darkness that made the stars sharper. It wasn't passion, not yet. It was pressure, support, the quiet intimacy of someone holding a lantern while you learn where to step. "You cannot charm fear into sleep," he said once, as dawn bruised the skyline. We had been walking the low market, bargaining for spices sharp enough to sting memory. He watched me finish a negotiation and then added without judgment, "You must make fear costly." "How?" I asked. I wanted danger without monstrosity, visibility without becoming bait. "You make it expensive to touch you," he said. "You make consequences chase anyone who tries." For him, consequences meant steel. For me, they meant obligation, public engagements, investments, council presence, a web of usefulness that made kings hesitate. I couldn't be ornamental. I had to be indispensable, on terms that forced them to prefer me alive. So I learned currency. I learned ledgers. I learned where interests ran thin. I listened to ministers complain about smugglers they once sponsored and ports they no longer controlled. I suggested rerouted caravans, small changes, sensible changes, that quietly redirected profit. In council, it sounded harmless. In markets, it was salvation. When merchants prospered, they spoke. When they spoke, dukes listened. Greed reconfigured itself into protection. A strategy is a strange lover. It doesn't hold your hand. It makes rooms safer. But sometimes, even strategy needs teeth. 2 weeks after the assassination attempt, Vorlag escalated. He arranged a hearing. He accused me of being an emissary for a foreign baron, someone who stood to benefit if the crown's attention drifted from border skirmishes. He produced a letter, forged but elegant, suggesting secret meetings in taverns I had never entered. He spoke like a man certain history would approve of him. The council hummed. Stability tugged one way, control tugged another. Caliph stood at the centre like an axis, law and personal history braided into authority. He had once claimed me with affection. Now he claimed me with procedure. I called witnesses, traders who had bargained with me, servants who knew where I had spent my nights. I told my story plainly, not all of it, never all of it, but enough truth to anchor belief. I let them see a mortal with alliances. When merchants arrived, few but reputable, the room shifted. Coin spoke louder than scandal. The vote didn't absolve me, but it transformed me from a liability into a complication. That night the palace buzzed differently. Knives turned toward ledgers instead of skin. They didn't vanish. They hid. We trained harder. Reza taught me posture, gesture, timing. How to use hands to hold attention. How to let a laugh land just off-center. Court, he said, is choreography. He also taught me to fight. Not heroically, but efficiently. Escape over victory. Misdirection over strength. How to turn heels and wrists into seconds of life. Confidence, I learned, was its own shield. In quieter moments we talked. About loyalty. About the difference between obedience and choice. About the things men break when they refuse cruelty. I liked him. More than I intended. But affection in a palace is always leverage. So we kept our distance where eyes could count. Then came the letter. Slipped under my door. One sentence. Calith's hand. "You mistake your cleverness for freedom. Come to the rose balcony at midnight. Alone." The rose balcony had once felt like promise. Now it felt like a blade's edge. Reza read the note carefully, folded it, set it down like something alive. "You won't go alone," he said. "I must," I answered. Surprise would only benefit Calith. He prepared contingencies, guards out of sight, distance close enough to matter. At midnight I went. The roses smelled too sweet. Calith waited, as he always had when he wanted me small. "You shouldn't have come," he said. "I came. You could have asked." "You did," I said, "when you marked me." For a long moment we were only consequences facing each other. Then he smiled, cold, small. "You'll be useful," he said. I laughed. For whom? For both of us. Tender, cruel. Then teach me to be useful to myself, I said. He hesitated. Then he took my hand. I will. For once, the night felt like a promise, and I dared to believe I might shape the blade, rather than only bleed on it. The palace was made of stone, but it breathed like something alive. At night especially, the hallways pulsed with a second heartbeat, the collective memory of centuries pressed into every carved arch and gilded moulding. Stones do not forget the hands that built them, nor the blood that baptized them, nor the voices that echo across them long after the speakers have turned to dust. That night, the palace remembered Caelith Draven, and it remembered the first time he faltered. When I left the rose balcony, the thorn of his last words followed me like a spectre down the corridor. I will teach you to be useful to yourself. There had been a gentleness in him I had not expected, a dangerous gentleness, the kind that could crumble kingdoms or raise them from ash. But beneath that, beneath the softness, was something more jarring. Fear. A king's fear was not a tremble, it was a small shift in tone, a stillness too deliberate, a question asked too softly. And I had seen all of those as he held my hand. I walked back through the shadowed halls, fingers brushing cold stone as if grounding myself in something solid, something not made of emotion or ancient promises. Rizar was waiting at the end of the corridor. He leaned against a column half in darkness, arms crossed. When he saw me, he pushed off the stone with a fierceness that startled the guards at his back. "You're late," he said. His tone wasn't scolding, it was relief wrapped in irritation. I wasn't in danger. "I decide what counts as danger," he snapped, then grimaced at himself, jaw tightening. "I'm sorry, you shouldn't have gone alone." "I didn't." His eyes flicked up. "There was no one with you." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "I didn't go alone. I walked with knowledge, with choice, with the truth of what I want. A beat. And with the knowledge that you wouldn't be far." That softened him. Not fully. He wasn't a man who softened fully, but enough that the edges of his posture loosened. "What did he want?" Reza asked, voice growing cautious again. "To warn me." A pause. "And to claim me." His jaw twitched. "He does not get to claim what he abandoned. He thinks otherwise. Let him think. Thinking is not the same as having." Another silence stretched. I took in his face, sharp, angular, carved with tension. He'd fought assassins for me. He'd defied his king for me. He'd walked behind me into the Hall of Stars when any other man would have fled. I wondered if he knew just how dangerous loyalty could become. Before either of us could speak again, a messenger barreled down the hall, bowing breathlessly. "My lady, Commander, the king requests your presence. Immediately." "For what?" Reza demanded. The messenger swallowed. He's gone to the memory hall." Reza stiffened, truly stiffened, like a man hearing the approach of something monstrous. "That's impossible," he said. "He hasn't entered that place in 100 years. 113, actually," the messenger whispered. I blinked. "The memory hall?" Reza turned to me, expression grim as winter. "It's where the king hides the memories he doesn't want to face." The memory hall sat deeper than any council chamber, deeper even than the crypts. It was carved into the oldest heart of the palace, a chamber domed like an ancient temple, the walls filled with mirrors instead of stone. But these mirrors weren't normal. They shimmered faintly as we passed, as if reflecting things that weren't happening in the hall but in minds centuries old. When we entered, the temperature dropped. Caelith stood in the centre of the room, cloak trailing across white marble like spilled ink, hair falling around his shoulders like a dark mantle, hands clasped behind him in a posture that could almost be mistaken for composure. But the mirrors betrayed him. Every time he breathed, barely, subtly, the reflections rippled in response like the surface of a disturbed lake. Reza stepped in front of me before I could speak, but Caelith's voice sliced through the air. "Do not." No power in it. No command. Just exhaustion. Reza hesitated. Only that. but it was enough to reveal the depth of his concern. He slowly stepped aside, though he remained within reach. Calith's gaze lifted to me, and his red eyes glowed with something disquieting. Not anger, not arrogance, not the icy self-assurance he wielded like a blade. Sorrow. I brought you here, he said quietly, because you should know the truth of what stands between us. Between us, I echoed. He gestured around the vast chamber. These are my memories, the ones I have sealed, the ones I cannot bear to let roam free within my mind. I turned. 1,000 mirrors reflected 1,000 versions of him. Young, old, victorious, broken, bloodied, yearning. Why show me this? I asked. Because you need to understand, Calith murmured. Why I failed you the way I did. Reza stiffened beside me. This is manipulation, he said. Your Majesty, whatever you think you're doing. Calith ignored him. He reached toward a mirror, one cracked through the center like a broken star. When his fingers brushed the surface, the image inside flickered to life. A prison chamber, a man screaming, chains glowing red-hot. Calith on his knees, holding a dying friend who whispered apologies he didn't owe. Kale, Calith said, and his voice cracked. Reza inhaled sharply. He's showing her that? I stared, breath caught in my throat. Kale, I repeated, the friend you mentioned before, the one your enemies. Yes, Calith whispered. This is the memory I sealed so I could rule. The memory that taught me love is a curse, a weakness that can be ripped from you by men who want to break your spine and rebuild your throne with your tears. Reza's voice dropped to a low growl. This is cruelty. She does not need to see. I do, I said quietly. Both men looked at me. I stepped toward the mirror. Kale's face, bloodied, broken, eyes wide with fear, was not the face of a mortal rival or a political enemy or a court pawn. It was someone Calith had loved in the way immortals rarely love, fiercely, recklessly, desperately. I held him, Calith whispered, closing his eyes. I felt his breath leave. I felt the warmth drain. I felt him go cold in my arms before I could save him. And so I learned. His eyes opened again. If I had not loved him, they could not have hurt me. Silence. Raw, heavy silence that pressed against my ribs. Reza spoke first. You let that memory make all your decisions. Yes, Calith said, and so I hid her. The her was me. The softness of his tone was worse than anger. It was too naked, too truthful. I hid you because I believed the world would take you from me, that the mere fact of wanting you would end with your body cold in my arms like his. Something twisted inside me. Pity, anger, grief, understanding, fury. So I built walls around you, Calith whispered, and in doing so, I trapped us both. The broken mirror flickered, then dimmed, the memory sinking back into silence. Reza's voice was sharp. And now what? You expect forgiveness? Understanding? For her to return to a cage built from grief? Calith didn't answer him. He looked only at me. You said you wished to be useful to yourself, he murmured. But you are useful to me too. Reza stepped forward. A dangerous step, one that might cost him his life, even now. She is not a tool. No, Calith said softly. She is a truth. That stunned both of us. Calith approached slowly, as if each step weighed centuries. Seeing you in that hall, he said to me, refusing me, rejecting me. It shattered something I didn't realize had already cracked. I swallowed hard. And what broke? I whispered. His voice was almost a confession. My certainty. Silence again. But this time, it held heat, not cold. And now? I asked. Now, Calith whispered, I must decide whether I can allow myself to want you without destroying you. Reza stepped between us, firm, unapologetic, protective. She is not yours to want. Calith looked past him with quiet devastation. She was mine, long before you ever dared stand beside her. Reza's jaw tightened. You lost that right. And you, Caliph said, eyes narrowing, have no right to take what is not yours. The air sharpened, the tension coiled, their magic stirred like claws beneath the floor. Before they could collide, I stepped between them. Both froze. I am not a throne, I said softly. I am not a prize. I am not a claim. And I will not be pulled like rope between two men who think they know my fate better than I do. They stared at me, red eyes burning, silver eyes smouldering. Both of you, I whispered, stop. Caliph exhaled sharply, something like awe in his gaze. Rezar lowered his head, not out of obedience, but out of something quieter, deeper, respect. I took another breath. I decide my path, I said. Not memories, not fear, not jealousy, not kings. Caliph's voice was hoarse. And what do you decide? I met his eyes. I decide to know the truth. All of it. And then? He asked. And then, I whispered, I decide whether to walk beside you or away from you. Reza inhaled sharply, a sound of pain he didn't hide. Caliph shut his eyes, a soundless reaction, but piercing. The palace held its breath. So be it, Caliph murmured. Ask your questions. I will not hide again. A promise, a surrender, a beginning. But also, I realized as the mirrors flickered alive again, a warning. Some truths change kingdoms, some shatter them. And the one I was about to learn was older than Caliph, and far deadlier than love. He once told me, his voice velveted with threat and confession, that kings do not make bargains. They make settlements. They redraw borders. They trade coin, curse, and law until the world bends into predictable arcs. Tonight he offered something else. A bargain with no precedent. A violence against precedent itself. The council chamber smelled of old paper and new panic. The carved table stood bare except for sigils worn smooth by centuries of argument. Outside, the city murmured like an animal that had discovered its leg in a trap. Inside, the dukes sat behind their faces, some eager to condemn, some eager to profit, others already calculating survival. Vorlag sat at the head like an accusation given flesh. His jaw was tight, his eyes were polished flint. He had not forgiven the market money. He had not forgotten the attempt on my life. He wanted a verdict. I stood beneath their gaze, feeling it press like stones into my spine. Visibility had been my choice, a dangerous one. But power always charges interest, and tonight the council meant to collect. They were here to decide whether I was a threat to the realm, an anachronism, an outrage, or whether Caliph's proposal of legal amendment would allow me to exist beside the crown. I had believed law might save me. I had believed in time, in proof, in 5-year trials that would blunt the knives. It was naive. Laws were written by men who preferred ghosts to living complications. Words were weapons, not promises. When the votes began, I watched stars burn across Caliph's face. He sat at the dais like weather, contained, inevitable. He had prepared more than speeches. He had alliances, ancient debts, dukes who admired his mind as much as feared his temper. His power belonged in rooms like this. Still, Vorlag's voice rose like an old bell. What you propose is folly, he said. Probation means nothing when weakness lies in the heart. We are not laboratories for human error. You fear change, Caliph replied evenly. You fear losing influence. The world grows. We must grow with it. You propose transforming a mortal, Vorlag snapped. A creature without right to the throne. Have you forgotten Aldara? The room tightened. Aldara, the madness, the ruin, history weaponized into warning. Caliph's jaw set. He looked at me then, and I saw what months had carved into him. Love, fear, fury, the damage of a man who had learned to survive by not loving and had failed at last. You have been brave, he said, though all could hear. You have changed the court's calculation, but I cannot wait 5 years. I will not watch 1,000 careful hands tear you from me while they debate margins. Reza's head snapped up. You mean an early transformation, he said. Not accusation. Fact. Yes, Caliph said. Here, tonight, not by law, by choice. Silence collapsed the room. Some dukes smiled, greed or horror indistinguishable. Vorlag rose, livid. You would defy the council? Start a civil war for romance? My defiance is necessity, Caliph said. You would burn the realm for a whim. I would burn it rather than lose what I love. Reza's hand found mine under the table, warm and anchoring. His look was an entire argument. Do not. I loved him in that moment as fiercely as I feared him. You cannot be forced, he murmured. You do not owe him your nature. You ask me to wait while men decide how invisible I must be, I answered. I will not spend my life hidden to preserve a throne's dignity. His fingers tightened. Caliph extended his hand, regal, personal. The ancient ring caught the light like a promise. I will demand nothing you do not consent to, he said. But hear this. Remain mortal under their fear, and you may survive. Or you may be stripped of protection, paraded as scandal, destroyed by righteous men. I cannot live imagining your blood on their hands. There was repentance in his voice. Too late, perhaps, but real. If you become one of us, he continued, openly and by choice, the law must adapt. There will be pain, violence, but there will be certainty. I can give you that faster than permission ever will. You offer certainty shaped by your need, Reza said, not by her life. She will be hers, Caliph snapped. I will not turn her into dust. The chamber erupted, shouts, scraping chairs, curses like thrown knives. Vorlag screamed treachery, names of mercenary houses surfaced. Arrest was proposed, alliances weighed. I stood as the first motions to detain me were voiced. Caliph rose too, and suddenly the room held two climates, law and hunger. You may not be the woman I first took, he said, voice breaking. But you are the woman I choose. Reza laughed, a short, dangerous sound. Do you choose war? I choose not to let them decide for me, I said. I choose. The ritual was older than the laws that tried to cage it. Blood, consent, the threading of two natures. The council feared it because forced immortality broke minds, and passion corrupted judgment. Caliph had prepared everything. Healers, herbs, iron, moonstone, the old chapel beneath the palace where light fell through cracked glass like wounds. Reza gripped my hand hard enough to bruise. Will you do this? He asked. I thought of the assassins, the markets, the nights made small, the nights Caliph had told me the world sideways. I will. The chamber split like a tree struck by lightning. Guards moved, Vorlag screamed. The city shifted toward war like a beast answering instinct. Reza wrapped my wrist in linen, kissed my thumb, a soldier's blessing. If this path devours you, he said, I will be the blade that keeps others from finishing it. The transformation was brutal, iron and petals. Caliph's voice thundered through catacombs, his forehead pressed to mine. Old words tore through me, pain burned, not erotic, not tender, but absolute. My blood sang, bones retooled, memory rewrote itself mid-breath. Reza held me as the world narrowed. When it ended, I breathed raw and new. Candlelight tasted sharp. Reza's heartbeat against my cheek ached with humanity. I chose, I said. My voice sounded older. Outside, alarms rang. The city inhaled war. The conflict did not begin with one blade, but with 1,000 refusals. Dukes withheld oaths. Merchants closed routes. Soldiers split loyalty. Vorlag hired mercenaries. Banners rose. Caliph commanded with terrible speed. He was not always right. He was often cruel. He was fiercely human. Reza fought like a man built for violence and mercy in equal measure. He broke lines. He bound wounds. War, he taught me, was arithmetic. We survived the first week by stone and will. We lost friends, bought allies, redrew the city in blood and ledger. Immortality did not end the court's hunger. It only changed the weapons. One night, I stood on the palace wall as fires burned like fallen stars and understood this. Love is not shelter, it is a decision. And decisions summon storms that reshape even the oldest stones. She chose immortality. But will she ever forgive the man who forced her fate too soon? Would you? Like, comment, and subscribe for the next gem.